In the heart of Europe, there once was a country that didn't fully belong to the East or the West. A socialist state, where you could drink Coca-Cola, listen to Western rock, and even travel abroad. Yet, behind the scenes, the government still watched your every move. This was Tito's Yugoslavia.
Mi smo more krvi prolili za bratstvo jedinstvo naših naroda. Nećemo nikome dozvoliti da nam dira ili da nam ruje iznutra, da se ruši.
Josip Broz Tito created a system unlike any other, more freedom than the Soviet Union, but still under firm state control. For some, it was a golden age, jobs, stability, and a sense of unity. For others, it was a time of shortages, government surveillance, and an economy running on borrowed time. Imagine waking up in the morning, heading to work, and knowing that no matter what, you'll always have a job. No layoffs, no unemployment, and a paycheck waiting for you every month. That was life in Tito's Yugoslavia, at least on the surface. In Yugoslavia, everybody has a job. Men, women, factory workers, farmers. If you wanted to work, the state made sure you had a job. And that wasn't just a promise, it was the law. Unemployment was practically non-existent. Here's where things get interesting. Tito didn't follow the Soviet model of a fully controlled economy. Instead, Yugoslavia had something unique: self-management socialism. The golden years? Definitely the 1950s to early 1970s. Yugoslavia was booming, factories were running, tourism was thriving, and people were enjoying a high standard of living compared to the rest of Eastern Europe. But by the late 1970s, things started to slow down. And in the 1980s, well, the cracks were hard to ignore. Factories were the backbone of the economy. Steel, textiles, and car production were huge industries. But Yugoslavia wasn't just about heavy industry. Tourism was also a major employer. If you lived near the coast, chances were you worked in hotels, restaurants, or shops catering to foreign tourists. Tito wanted Yugoslavia to be independent from the Soviet Union, and that meant finding a different economic model. Self-management socialism gave workers more say in their jobs and allowed some level of market freedom. Plus, Tito made deals with both the East and the West, borrowing money from Western banks while still being a socialist state. Wondering how people feel about their jobs? Here's the thing. On paper, guaranteed jobs sounded great. But in reality, well, let's just say productivity wasn't always top tier. Office workers often joked about the "we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us" mentality. For decades, the Yugoslav economy seemed like the perfect middle ground. Socialist, but with market freedom. People had stability, travel freedom, and a better life than most of the Eastern Bloc. But by the time Tito passed away, the economy was built on borrowed money, and when those debts came due, things took a turn for the worse. But before we get to that, let's take a look at something everyone cares about. How did people spend their free time? What did they eat, watch, and listen to? Welcome to entertainment, culture, and daily life in Tito's Yugoslavia. In the heart of Yugoslavia, life was full of music, movies, and social gatherings. Unlike the strict, controlled environment of the Eastern Bloc, Yugoslavs had a unique privilege: access to both socialist and Western culture. You could listen to the Beatles, wear Levi's jeans, and watch Hollywood blockbusters, all while living under a socialist system. Music, movies, and sports were a huge part of daily life. Yugoslav rock bands like Bijelo Dugme, Riblja Chorba, and Ekaterina Velika had massive followings, blending Western rock with local influences. Folk music thrived too, with artists like Lepa Brena becoming icons. Western music wasn't banned. People could freely enjoy records from the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Pink Floyd. The Yugoslav film industry produced epic war films like Battle of Neretva, which even featured Hollywood actors like Orson Welles. A fun fact, a movie poster designer was Pablo Picasso. Comedy was also huge, with cult classics like Top Lista Nadrealista, something like British Monty Python. Unlike in the USSR, Hollywood and European movies were common in theaters, exposing Yugoslavs to a variety of global cinema. Sports were another source of pride. Football was practically a religion. with clubs like Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb drawing passionate fans. Yugoslavia was also a basketball powerhouse, producing legendary players like Dražen Petrović and Vlade Divac. The country won multiple Olympic medals and was one of the strongest sports nations in Europe. Social life was vibrant. Cafes were central to daily life. People spent hours drinking coffee and talking. Dance halls, nightclubs, and live music venues filled the cities, offering a lively nightlife. Sports and outdoor activities were popular, from skiing in Slovenia to swimming in the Adriatic Sea. Vacations were a big deal. Most workers got a full month of paid leave, and the Adriatic coast was a dream destination. People enjoyed affordable seaside vacations in Croatia, Montenegro, and Slovenia. Unlike in other communist states, Yugoslavs had more travel freedom, with many visiting Italy, Greece, and Austria. Food culture was also strong. Traditional dishes like cevapi and sarma were widely loved, but Italian and Mediterranean influences made Yugoslav cuisine diverse. Restaurants were affordable, and eating out was a regular activity for many. The late 1960s to early 1980s are often seen as Yugoslavia's cultural peak. The economy was strong, optimism was high, and cultural influences from both East and West were thriving. However, as the 1980s progressed, economic struggles made entertainment less accessible to many. Every part of Yugoslavia had its own unique cultural identity. Belgrade was the nightlife capital, known for its concerts and clubs. Zagreb was the heart of rock music and alternative culture. Sarajevo had a thriving film and comedy scene. Ljubljana was a hub for avant-garde art and music. And coastal cities like Split and Dubrovnik hosted famous summer festivals. Unlike the Soviet Union, Tito wanted Yugoslavia to be seen as a modern, independent socialist state. Allowing rock music, Hollywood movies, and stylish Western fashion was a way to show the world that Yugoslavia was different. This mix of socialism and Western influence created a one-of-a-kind lifestyle. Now, before we think this was a completely free society, let's not forget, the government still had its limits. Censorship existed. People could enjoy Western culture, but criticizing Tito or the government was a different story. Music and movies were fine as long as they didn't challenge the system. Satire and jokes were tolerated, but only up to a point. Surveillance was real. If a band or artist pushed too far, their work could be banned. Political dissidents, writers, and journalists sometimes faced pressure or even arrest. Freedom of speech wasn't absolute. Speaking out against Tito or Yugoslav could get you in serious trouble. For decades, Yugoslavia was a unique success story, a socialist state with a decent standard of living, Western influence, and freedom to travel. But after Tito died in 1980, everything changed. At first, people believed Yugoslavia could survive without Tito, but cracks began to show. The economy, which had relied on Tito's ability to balance different political and economic interests, started falling apart. Unemployment rose, inflation skyrocketed, and foreign debt became a massive problem. The country that once gave its people free healthcare, education, and travel now struggles to provide basic necessities. By the late 1980s, stores had shortages. People lined up for fuel, sugar, and even toilet paper. The middle class, once a proud symbol of Yugoslav socialism, began to shrink. The economy was a ticking time bomb. Tito had borrowed heavily from Western banks to maintain the high living standards. When the global economy shifted, Yugoslavia struggled to pay off its debt. The federal government introduced austerity measures, wage freezes, price controls, and cuts to social services. People's savings lost value overnight. And then there was nationalism. Under Tito, different ethnic groups coexisted, but beneath the surface, tensions were always there. Without his leadership, politicians from each republic started pushing for their own interests. Nationalist rhetoric spread like wildfire. The real breaking point came in the early 1990s. Political leaders in Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, and other republics clashed over power and economic resources. nationalist propaganda turned neighbors into enemies. By 1991, the first shots of the Yugoslav wars were fired. What followed was one of the most brutal conflicts in modern European history. Ordinary people, families that had lived side by side for generations, were now divided by war. Cities that once thrived on multiculturalism became battlegrounds. Infrastructure collapsed, and many who grew up believing in the unity of Yugoslavia were forced to pick a side. Tito was the glue holding everything together. Without him, nationalism, economic collapse, and political power struggles tore the country apart. Some believe that if reforms had come earlier, if leaders had focused on fixing the economy and addressing ethnic tensions, Yugoslavia might have survived in some form. For some, Yugoslavia was a golden era, a time of stability, opportunity, and cultural freedom. For others, it was a system that was bound to fail. Today, the countries that once made up Yugoslavia have gone their separate ways, each with its own identity and challenges. But one thing is certain: Tito's Yugoslavia was one of the most unique experiments in modern history. A country that wasn't quite east or west, socialist or capitalist. And while it no longer exists, its legacy still sparks debates today.